Welcome to another video coverage of This Week in Rails. I'm Dave Kimura, and today we have Greg bringing us the updates, so let's dive right in. For the first item, the Rails World Tickets waiting list, and so there is a waiting list. If we visit this link, you'll see the dates. You can see that registration is not currently open, but you can register to receive an email as when the registration will open. I do believe that it's limited for the number of spots, so be sure to join that waitlist so you can reserve your spot when the registration opens. For the next item, use configure primary key type in Action Mailbox migration. And so this is a bug fix that was for the Action Mailbox, so if you're not using that, this won't apply to you. So with this change, it's updating an old migration file in Action Mailbox, adding in the ID primary key type, and that primary key type is going to look at the configured ORM, the primary key type, or it'll just default to primary key. And so I think that if this is an existing application, if you are already using the Action Mailbox, then you may want to check your schema to see if you have that in there. It most likely won't matter if you're using the defaults. However, if you have deviated from the defaults using a different primary key type, then you might find yourself in a situation where it wasn't working as you would have expected. But overall, I think it is a pretty small change, and it probably shouldn't affect what you're doing too much. And the next item, support the message pack as a cache serializer format. A message pack is something that I covered in the past, but essentially this pull request is allowing the message pack to be an option for the cache format. There is some performance benefits with message pack. However, if you are using an object that's not supported and you're trying to push it into message pack, you'll get an error. And then that basically means that that object type is out of scope of what message pack can support, and you would need to fall back to one of the other versions, whether it's JSON with a Marshall load and a Marshall dump or something similar. And for the next item, improve cache performance for bare string values. And this one's very exciting because if you are doing Russian doll caching, where you have a cache of the inner element, and then outside of there, you have a loop going over there and you're caching that as well, and maybe you're caching at a higher level, then this is going to improve that performance on the views because that's essentially just string values. And the performance improvement is no little matter because if we look at the benchmarks with Rails 7.1 versus Rails 7.0, we're getting about a 3 times performance increase. And this isn't specific to message pack. All you'll need to do is once you upgrade your Rails application to 7.1, as you normally would, in the application.rb, you would change the load defaults from 7.0 or whatever version you're on to 7.1. And the next item is allow passing nil to rewhere. And if you're unfamiliar with rewhere, it's an active record query method that allows you to unscope a previous condition for another one. So if we look at the documentation for this, you can have a post where trashed is equal to true, and then you can also call where trash is equal to false, and that'll find all the trashed items that's both true and false. However, if you then have a post where trashed is true, you can then call rewhere set trashed is equal to false, and then it'll unscope this original condition, and then you'll just have the where trashed is equal to false, as you can see in the generated query. And you're able to chain this even further. Post where active is true, you are then finding where the trashed is true, and then later you call the rewhere trashed is false. And so it kept that active is true, and then now you just have the trashed is false. And so for this pull request to allow nil and rewhere is actually kind of a big deal because it's going to be very useful in situations where you do have a long query and you've broken it out into its own class, and then you were doing some conditional checks to see if this should be part of that query. And one use case I would have for something like this would be the main search for your application, where you have a complex search able to add in a lot of different kinds of filters, but not all those options are selected. So you want to conditionally add these in based on what you're doing. And so by using the rewhere, if you do have some conditional logic, then you're able to do those queries, but then also to remove those conditional queries if some other conditions down the chain are set to true. And overall, it just really makes for a more powerful ORM. And for the last item, use the migration examples to showcase database-agnostic raw SQL execution. And this is just a documentation update, but it's an important one. because before it was taking into account a certain database usage, but now the documentation is more agnostic to your database backend. And for those who aren't very well versed in SQL, they may not realize that the examples were specific to Postgres or MySQL, but wouldn't work with something like SQLite. And over the past week, there were 16 contributors to the Rails framework, so I really appreciate everyone's help and their efforts to make Rails a much better framework. And if you would like to receive your own email copy of This Week in Rails, you can go to rubyonrails.org/newsletter to receive your own copy. I don't produce that newsletter, I simply provide this video coverage of it. Well, that's all for this week's video coverage of This Week in Rails. Thanks for watching.